Unicorns and glitter and taxidermy critters are just some of the things they like. They also enjoy 80s hair bands, Grizzly Adams and John Goodman, so if you think that's weird then you can take a hike. But the things they enjoy the most are making art and cracking jokes, so without further ado, here are your hosts. You've got your two artsy gals, your two artsy gals. Here are your two artsy gals.
Hey, I'm Katie.
And I'm Sharon.
And welcome to the Two Artsy Gals podcast.
Woohoo.
I'm going to apologize now for any coughing I can't edit out because I have a cold and sniffling. And I sound weird. I sound really weird and I feel like poo. And I'm a little bit loaded on NyQuil. So we're going to introduce today, this is the first episode of a series that we're going to do for the summer. Once a month for June, July, and August, we're going to be doing a little series about selling artwork because I get a lot of questions about that kind of stuff. So I thought it would be helpful to kind of talk about it here and get it out in the open. So this episode, we're going to talk about selling your artwork in general, like the decision to sell your work, the pitfalls, talk a little bit about pricing and where to sell your stuff, and just some of the ins and outs of that. And then the second episode in July, we're going to talk about copyright and how to protect yourself and how to not get yourself in trouble. Because if you're a mixed media artist and you're doing a lot of collage work and stuff, sometimes you can, you need to know the rules about using images and stuff. And also how to protect yourself in an online world. And then in August, the last episode of the series will be about photographing your artwork and stuff. But today, we're just going to get right into it because this is actually something that Sharon and I talk about a lot.
Yeah.
We go through, our frustrations and our excitement, our upset, and I also feel like it's something that I talk a lot about with my other artist friends too. It comes up a lot in like our art groups, and again, it's something that people ask me a lot about. Do you find people like ask you a lot about selling your art when they find out that you do sell?
Yeah, I do find that people do ask. I feel like you and I talk about it a lot. Yeah, I have a couple artist friends that we go back and forth and talk about it a lot. And especially, excuse me, where to sell, what's the best venue to sell, and pricing.
Mm-hmm.
Pricing's so hard because I think that you're, again, are putting yourself out there and asking somebody to pay for your art, and you put a price on it, and sometimes they don't understand why there's that price, the work that goes into it, or, oh, I could make that, or, oh, so-and-so
I
is
hate the, oh, I
less.
could make that. That always pisses me off.
It really makes me mad, yeah, because it's like, well, then make it. But the other thing is that I think about that. It's like, as an artist, I get it. It's like, well, yeah, I could make that, but that person made it and had their spin on it, and it was their interpretation of how that piece of art would be. I make a ton of jewelry, but I still buy jewelry from other artists because I could still go and find those beads or whatever, but that person put those colored beads together in a certain way, or they put their spin on it, and so. Well,
and you don't always want, like, you work in a certain style, like, you don't always want to wear your style of jewelry, like, you want something different and something funky, and, that's just like, I don't always want just my artwork hanging on my wall.
Right. Yeah, so it's a really weird thing when people say that, especially when they say it to your face, because it's like, well, great, thanks for looking. I don't know.
People are super fucking rude about that sometimes, and I'm like, I'm always so shocked. I'm like, really?
It's a strange thing, yeah, because then I feel like I've had to just come up with, I sort of come up with not making excuse why, I don't make excuses anymore why my stuff is the price it is. Rather, I explain the process and hope that they understand why, it is the price. Actually, the other day at the market, a woman was looking at earrings and she was really liking, she's like, oh, wow. And she's really interested. And you're like, well, how long does it take for each piece? And, and how do you do it? So she was really appreciating it and trying to understand why, oh, okay, so this takes a long time. Wow, that's really great. So she could understand why it was the price because she was truly listening to why, that it took me that long to make that piece of jewelry. But where other people are just like, well, I can make that. Just like when you have to go approach somebody to sell your art, you're like, here I am. It's like you're standing naked there in front of them.
It totally is. It's so funny because I get such varying comments on the journals, the hand-bound journals that I make and sell. Like, that process that I do to make the covers and, like, the fake leather and, like, the sculpture work, and then you hand sew a journal together, like, that's a lot of time and effort into that. And sometimes I get people that are just like, why the hell would I pay that much for a journal? And first of all, I don't feel like I charge that much for my journals. I actually feel like I charge a little less than I should. People get really nasty. I've gotten messages on eBay, like people sending you with the private messages, or not eBay. I got eBay on the brain this week. Etsy. I've had people like try to negotiate a lower price and say like, that's a really, really overpriced for a journal. And I'm like, it's a hand-bound journal, and it's all handmade. Fuck off. Like, Well,
that brings me to another point where I think where some, like, for instance, well, I don't want to, like, knock a certain site because I think that Etsy works really well for some people, but I think for me personally it didn't work because I found that people were just trying to sell stuff on there that, and really undervalued the work that they would do. And I thought, you're not even charging for the supplies. Okay, well, if you got the supplies for free, you're not charging for your time. And so that really can devalue other artists and make other people think, oh, well, this should be inexpensive. And I think it's gotten to be a little confusing on some of those sites because people are selling supplies and other things, and then also people aren't valuing their work. So, and I think I'm pretty sensitive to that because I worked in a fine arts gallery for 5 years, and I know, I mean, being an artist, I know what, goes into it, but a lot of people would say that, again, oh, well, I could make that. I'm like, really? You can cast a 14 karat gold ring that looks like a braid?
Yeah.
That's cool. So that's great. You should go make that then.
Yeah, and shut your pie hole.
I'm going, well, then why are you looking in here? It's like, that's great. Well, maybe you should go somewhere else, and yeah, it's just it's a tough, thing. But that being said, I think that that's why it's really important to find what works, For me personally, I tried Etsy and it didn't work for me, but then I decided, well, selling at bazaars and selling in stores did work really well for me. And some of the stores I discovered after a time, it wasn't a very good fit, but it was always a really good learning lesson when those shops didn't fit. And it wasn't necessarily, always for bad reasons. It just wasn't, maybe the clientele wasn't the right clientele, or, it just wasn't in the right neighborhood. And then I have one shop that I consistently get a check from. It may be sometimes really small and sometimes it'll be bigger, but I've found that works really well for me. And the cut that she gives me works really well. Yeah.
So I want to kind of back things up a little bit and kind of break this up into sections.
Yeah.
So basically, I want to address okay, someone's coming to us and asking us, for instance, they've decided they want to sell their art. So, what are just I feel like maybe there are some just basic things that people should ask themselves before they want to step out into the world and put themselves out there. I think the biggest thing for me is it leaves you a little bit vulnerable if you're thin-skinned. Or, I have a hard time and I wrestle with feeling rejected when people don't buy my art. I feel like people are saying something bad about my work, or I just feel this crushing rejection. Are you thick-skinned enough to take that? That's, I think, something people should really seriously ask themselves.
I definitely think so. And I think that you grow a thicker skin after doing it time and time again. And I think those first rejections are really a bummer. And it's not a reflection on what your artwork, the quality of your artwork. And I think that there's some times where people aren't very nice about it, but it's not a reflection on the artist. And then other times people are nice and just say, oh, this wouldn't actually work, but maybe this would work somewhere else,
Yeah.
They can be nice about it. But I think that is really hard. And I think that is a really important thing for people to ask themselves. How are you going to handle the rejection?
Yeah. And you actually just said something that made me think that's another thing that people should know. You need to know what your audience is. You're going to face a lot less rejection and be more received better if you know what your audience is. Like, you need to be marketing to that audience.
Absolutely. Well, I think about what's that store downtown, that really strange store that has like skulls and
I don't know,
taxidermy stuff. And
I should know about that store.
You know what it is.
I do?
It's on 23rd. Yeah.
Is it the Peculiarium or what? I can't even fucking say that word.
Maybe.
But it's awesome.
But point being is that, like, your work would do really well in there. My work wouldn't be. So it would be silly for me to go in there because I would just get rejected. I mean, just like you said, yeah, you have to know what your audience is and looking at the selling
to.
Yeah.
Well, that's like if I go into like the wrong place, like I don't feel like even the one on Hawthorne, Presence of Mind. That's a really awesome store and I love it, but I don't think that my work would do really well there.
Right.
Because it's cutesy kitschy stuff. And I've actually had people say, well, this would be cool for Halloween. I'm like, you're not living the lifestyle, man. Like, whatever, fuck off with that. Skulls aren't just for fucking Halloween. You gotta embrace the creepiness. Be creepy.
Oh my god.
Oh, I would have to rein that in. My NyQuil's kicking in, sorry.
Hilarious. I think you should take another chug of NyQuil. That's hilarious. Oh my god. But, yeah, so I think that is really key. And I want to also say, I think another thing to help with being prepared is be prepared. Have a good body of work. Don't just go in with a few things. Go in with a collection and have a lot of stuff to be able to pick from. I mean, they may only look at 5 things, but be prepared,
Yeah.
And also sometimes it's a good idea to have pictures of your work with things listed. I mean, if you sell cards, you're maybe going to have multiples of those cards. Kind of having a price sheet is good for some people. I haven't necessarily ever had to do that, but for some artists, I think that it is. Yeah. And go in there also knowing if they're going to ask you, if you're going into a shop, do you sell wholesale? Do you do consignment? Decide on what's going to work for you, because sometimes if they buy it outright, they aren't going to pay you as much as they are with consignment.
That's true.
And then some consignment shops are only going to pay you 50-50 split. And that's not that great.
Yeah, no, but and I had a bad experience with that once, because when my son was in preschool, I used to make all those crazy superhero capes. Mm-hmm. And I went do you remember Haggis McBaggis in Salwood? I think it was a kid's store, but I shouldn't say that out loud because it didn't go, well, they're fucking closed now anyway. Like, they wanted to sell, it was actually a consignment situation, but their markup was so, like, I didn't realize how much they were trying to charge for those capes. Mm-hmm. And because I was making them on such a small scale, I had to charge, like, I couldn't give them a big discount because I wasn't getting a big discount on my materials because I wasn't able to buy in bulk. Right. So, but it come to find out, like, their markup on the consignment crap was almost 50%. Mm-hmm. So these capes that would have sold for like $35, which is kind of a lot for a toddler cape, but they were really cool and really intricately made. They were charging like closer to $60.
Yeah.
No one's going to pay $60 for a cape that's going to fit a kid for 2 fucking years.
Well, and that's them also not recognizing that too. Some of the shops really know you know, how to display stuff and how to price it. Because I am actually pretty sure that the shop that I sell at in Portland marks my stuff up a little bit, but she can.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes when I get the check, I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So I'm pretty sure that she marks them up a bit, but it works for her and it works for where she is. Other places I've sold, that doesn't fly.
No, it's low.
And that's why I just pulled my jewelry. It wasn't because of them, you know, it just wasn't the right venue.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. You know, they need to know their audience too, and they need to understand that too.
Well, I think also those are questions that you should come into any situation either prepared to answer for yourself or prepared to ask of someone else.
Well, and also being able to stand up and saying, no, I won't take less than this percentage, or no, I can't do that, or this is the way that I make my stuff. You know, maybe this isn't a good fit. Just knowing to have pride in that so that you don't, you know, you don't screw yourself later.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true.
Because like I was making handmade cards and they were taking me so long, and they sold retail for $4 and I was getting $2 at this one place. And that was,
that's,
you know,
that's not enough.
It really wasn't. And when I wanted to mark them up, they were like, I don't think our customers will pay more than that, which was so funny because people will pay $6 for a Hallmark card at Safeway, not even thinking about it. But sometimes they have a hard time paying for a handmade card. So I actually just stopped making handmade cards and selling them at shops because it wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
It wasn't the time that I was putting into these cards was not worth it. But it's funny because now I buy handmade cards like so many times. If I see somebody selling handmade cards at a bazaar and I know they worked hard, I like buy them because I know that they worked hard on them.
Well, and I think that's also kind of something that's hard to learn how to do, but you do have to, if you're going to sell your artwork, you kind of need to learn to admit when it's not working and move on.
Absolutely, is finding your niche, you know. Yeah, I think it's taken me a long time, and I feel like there was a lot of uphill battles, and now I feel like in a comfortable place where I am with some of my stuff, and I don't sell it that many places. I'm not making a living, but I feel like I do make money at it, and I'm happy because I really enjoy the process of what I'm doing.
Yeah. That's another thing that I feel like we should point out too. You said you don't make a living at it. It is really fucking hard to make a living just being an artist or someone who makes handmade goods and only live off of that.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I know one artist that does that solely. I know most of the other artists I know do a lot of different things. They have a lot of different hats, and I think that that's...
Well, I feel like I always get like comments from people like, dude, you should make these and sell them. You could get rich. Dude, you should be selling these more. Like, dude, you could totally not have to worry about your life. You could just like be rich selling these. And that's not a realistic thing to think.
No. And I think when people also like, oh, you're so crafty, you should just make this and sell those. This is the next thing. And it's like, but do you really want to be making those things?
No, yeah.
You know, I mean, that's the thing is like, I don't want to make that. Like, you know, that doesn't bring me joy, and that's gonna...
Or even like, I sew, and I like to sew, but everyone I know who sees the things that I sew, especially family members, are always like, why aren't you doing this for a living? I'm like, because it's my fucking hobby.
Right.
I don't want to do it for a living. Like, and I also think that people don't, I buy a fucking pattern, and I cut it out, and I pin it to fabric, and I sew it together. Like, I didn't design that myself.
Right.
Like, you know, and it took me a few days to do it. I'm not a machine. Like, I can't, no one's gonna buy a dress that I bought a pattern for and made, you know? I mean, it's just silly. It's...
Right.
Yeah, I think you just kind of have to learn to ignore that kind of shit too, but, because there's all kinds of stupid crap that people come up with, but...
Yeah.
But those are kind of some of the pitfall things I kind of want to talk about venues, because we've mentioned a few of them already, and we actually did a little, I put up a little survey, and had some artist friends answer a few questions about this, and, you know, we listed all of the venues that I could think of off the top of my head, and Etsy, of course, is everyone uses Etsy. eBay, less people use eBay, about 33%, versus the 66.67% of people that answered used Etsy. No one that took the survey uses Artfire. And let's see, 16% do bazaars and trunk shows and craft fairs, and an equal amount also did of the 66% do physical stores, galleries, private sales, and their own website or blog. Really, the only venues that I am familiar with are Etsy and eBay, and I haven't had much luck with Etsy for different reasons, but I feel like my work and the work that I do, because it's so heavily textural and that is such a big part of what makes it look the way it does, I feel like it doesn't sell well when people cannot pick it up and physically hold it in their hands and look at it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Etsy was just not working because it's hard to convey the totality of what the work that I do is. So, and again, I think that, and this is something that almost everybody expressed that took this survey, was that Etsy is oversaturated. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to get your foot in, like to stand out. I think if you're going to do something like Etsy, you need to already have a following of people.
Yeah.
Who are going to be your customer base that you can pull in with you. Mm-hmm. And I think that you need to be prepared to really utilize social media, like Facebook, Twitter, whatever, to get the word out about what you're doing, because it is hard to stand out in a marketplace that is that fucking packed with people trying to do the same thing that you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. Like, it is just so saturated.
It is. And absolutely, I think that is really important. I found for me, I spent a lot of time trying to work on my blog and list things and do social media. And in the end, I didn't enjoy it. I was not enjoying it, and it didn't work for me. And I think there's a lot of people that are really great at doing the social media to keep up on it, to sell their work, and they do great, and I give them kudos. But for like me personally, that's why that venue also didn't really work. Mm-hmm. I think that's another good thing to ask yourself, are you able to keep up on all of that? That stuff. That's why
it is daunting. It gets daunting after a while. And then, I feel like around the holidays when I have big sales and stuff and I'm trying to really move merchandise, I'm a little bit desperate because I want to be funding my family's Christmas and, whatever. So, and I also want to pay for the art supplies that I've, the supplies that I've put into making my merchandise. Mm-hmm. So I always feel like, God, am I just blasting my Facebook followers with too much information every day? Am I I feel like it's, I just worry that it's too much, that I'm doing too much. But I think that everybody has consistently had that particular issue with Etsy. It's just, if you're not a big name already, and you don't have the money to plunk into paying for to boost you can do the little, what is it called?
Boost your listing.
Boost your listing kind of thing. I've paid for that before and it didn't do shit for me. So
yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head that if you have a following already, maybe people that, buy your stuff already in a store or what have you, if you have that following, then Etsy can be great venue.
Come back and buy it.
Yeah, that consistently come back and buy, and that you just have a following, and you use Etsy like your blog or like your website. If maybe you don't have a website that people can buy from, but that you can link it to the Etsy so they can buy from it. I think one of my friends does prints, and she sells a ton of prints and paintings. And so that she does cards and prints and things like that, and people collect her work. So Etsy works well for her because she uses it like a storefront. And so people can go just to that, and it works well for her. But I think, because she's doing paintings and it's not something you have to touch and feel or try on, it does work really well for her. That's why I think for me, stores and bazaars have worked really well, and actually trunk shows.
And see, now that's kind of where the venue that I'm going to be trying to switch to, because I think I mentioned already, I recently closed my Etsy store. I just felt like the effort that I put into it and the investment and time and the investment in money for renewing listings, even though it's not that expensive, was just not enough to justify like literally the 1 or 2 sales I get a month. If that. I feel like if I, my plan is to spend the summer building up inventory for all of the fall and winter holiday shows. And I feel like my work will probably move better in those situations.
I definitely think so. And I think a really important piece of advice for that is try to enter into every show there is. There's a lot of good shows that are at schools and different places, different bazaars, and you may get into some and you may not get into others. And some of them will be really great for you and some of them won't be really great. Just take great notes, which one worked well one year. And sometimes I even did, like maybe if I didn't have a great year at one, I would try it again the next year just to see, how it did. Like, okay, well, maybe it just was a bad year. Maybe not. Like there was one that I did for, I think 3 years in a row. And the first year was awesome. The next year was okay. And then the following year was pretty good. But that was like a show that I was like, okay, this is really well ran. I felt that their fees were fair. So I think just trying to get into those,
Well, and how would
shows.
people, like, for our listeners, like, how would you advise them to find out about shows and what their fees are and who they should contact and
start looking in the paper and online and you'll start to see the advertisements for shows. And so what I basically did was, I think the first one I got into, I think I heard of word of mouth and I got into it. And then I would make sure to go around to the other artists that had been doing the circuit of shows, because there's always going to be artists that go to every single bazaar and are in everything. So like in the Portland area, they're going to be doing Crafty Wonderland. They're going to be doing all the school bazaars and shows. And many times at their booth, they'll say which shows they're doing that year or the next year, or, oh, see me at the next show. So you can grab one of their flyers and see all the shows that they're going to be into and try to enter those bazaars.
That's a good idea.
And so I would ask them, and you just start, you just kind of got to Google, in your area, bazaars. And I'll actually give at the end of tonight, I'll give a couple books that have some good information about that. So that was the one way that I did it. And I just asked other artists, and a lot of the crafters are going to be super helpful. Like, oh yeah, and enter into this one, talk to so-and-so, because this is a good show. And you may get into some of them, and you may not get into some of them.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I didn't get into a lot of them because just in Portland, the market was so saturated with jewelry, and I had to start to realize it wasn't me. It was just that the market was really saturated.
Yeah.
And
that's kind of a problem with Portland too, is because I feel like I do pretty unique work, but this city is chock fucking full of artists and crafty people. So, I mean, there's like a surplus of creatives that live in this town. So,
absolutely. So, yeah, I think that can be hard too. And so,
you kind of gotta learn to make yourself stand out. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say to change your style just so you can sell work, but you need to be able to do something that appeals to people because it's a little bit different than what they're seeing.
Right. For example, like, I feel like here I do stand out where people are like, oh wow, I haven't ever seen anything like this, because there aren't, what I'm doing now, it's not saturated with jewelers. Which is good,
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
I think another really good, can I jump onto like trunk shows? You want me to
Yeah, please, definitely.
I think another thing, so I've had like across the board experiences with doing trunk shows. So I had a couple friends that we would get together and have a trunk show at somebody's house, or one friend would always find a way to like have a trunk show at like a bar or like a wine bar or a restaurant. Maybe she would know the owner
to start buying stuff.
Yeah, and would know the owner. But a lot of times I didn't have good luck with those shows. But that was okay because I learned from that, and I started to realize, like, I started having trunk shows about 2 to 3 times a year at my job, because I'd always be wearing my jewelry and people would, bring it in. And so I would make up a huge collection and have a huge trunk show at my work, and people during lunch would take a look. And a lot of times that's a good venue. Look at, if you have a workplace to do it, do that. Or the other thing is ask your friends. My mother-in-law would do trunk shows for me at her house.
I know. I went to one and that was awesome.
Yeah, it's really fun. So they're bringing in, find those loudmouths for you, those chatty Cathys. My mother-in-law can get the word out and ask all of her friends. She's
so awesome at that.
She's really great at like bringing in the troops and like,
she
okay,
is.
we're gonna have a trunk show and it's gonna be this day, and maybe that, So one thing that I would always do for her, like maybe she would have like a drink and some snacks, but then I would give her a piece of artwork or let her pick out a few things. So find those friends that have lots of friends, and have a trunk show at your house. That's a really
freaking good idea.
At your friend's house, and it's almost like an Avon party because the host gets maybe a free piece of art, but you're introducing it. Yeah, you're introducing it to people that may not see it, and they want to come over and they want to support, and then make sure that you have things that are maybe on the lower end, have a good spread of price points too. Just get creative with where you can sell.
Yeah.
And I found that those kinds of things worked well for me at people's houses, at my old job.
I kind of want to try that.
Yeah.
So I know now this episode's going to run a little bit long. But this is something that we talk a lot about. But I think there's a lot to cover. I almost feel like we should have broken this into another episode, but what the hell? We're just going to roll with it. I don't have no experience with selling in physical stores or getting my items into physical stores. So briefly, what do you do? Like, what's the process? What does that look like? You just go knock on doors or?
Well, typically I'll go so for example, I'd decide, okay, what's an area where I want to sell at? And I didn't have much in a store. So maybe, for example, in Portland, I'd say, okay, I want to try the Pearl District. So I would always have my stuff with me. I would pick a day and walk around and look at shops and decide, would this be a good place to sell my stuff? Would my stuff fit in this store? And then sometimes I would ask, once I said, okay, this seems like a good place. Maybe I would just scope it out that day and then go back later. But then many times I'd say, I would approach somebody there and say, who would I speak to about selling my product at your store? Or do you have either you ask for the owner or the manager, or how do you guys work doing consignments? And a lot of times they'll say, well, the owner does it, but they like to do it through email, or here's the manager's phone number or email. You can contact them through there. Sometimes because they don't want to do a cold call,
Yeah.
Just be nice and you don't want to be like, oh, hey, I have my stuff. Can I show you? You want to ask, what is the process? Do you consign artwork here? What's the process for artists?
That's a very
their work?
Good idea
because
to ask about the process.
Yeah, asking the process, because they don't like a cold call. And then sometimes people will say, oh yeah, okay, so people come in on every Thursday during this time, and this is when I look at stuff. Or no, I like to see pictures emailed. Or sometimes they're just like, oh yeah, I've got a little time now, I can take a look. That's why I always have my stuff with me.
Yeah.
So always be prepared. Have your business cards, and then I always like to follow up with a nice email saying, oh, it was really nice to meet you today. I look forward to showing you my things, or, what have you. Always follow up with an email.
Yeah.
So it's really important, like you said, knowing your audience. That's why you want to scope out your shops. And then the other thing is that you don't want to have your stuff in a shop right next door to another shop. That's not gonna
No, that's true. That's not going to help sales in either place, and I don't think either place is going to really appreciate that.
No, not at all. And
so you want to just be in one store in one neighborhood and then go across town to a different store in a different neighborhood.
Right. So in Portland, it was like, okay, look in the Pearl, then maybe one in Northwest. Even though Pearl's close to Northwest, you could probably do that. And then like Southeast, Northeast, Northwest, one in each, kind of little area. But yeah, you don't want them in the same.
No. And you mentioned, and I actually think that we'll probably add one more for September to this series, because you mentioned business cards and it just made branding pop into my head.
Yeah.
So, and that kind of goes into knowing your audience and selling to your audience, and having good branding helps market your work kind of for you. So I think we're going to add a another one to this, because that's kind of my wheelhouse with graphic design and stuff like that and marketing. So we'll add that, but that's something to also be thinking about when you're doing all this. You do need business cards, and you need to look professional. People want to know that you're together, and you can do this like you're together enough to run your own business, because that's what it is. It's a business, even if you're working from home.
Exactly. Yeah. You want to, and they also want to know that you can provide the product too. And that's something, you don't want to be in so many stores that you can't keep up with the merchandise, refilling the merchandise. So I typically, like, for example, when I get a check from the shop that I sell at in Portland, at Thea's Interiors, then, immediately I'll contact her and say, I can see what I've sold. So then I know, okay, I need to refill that many items. And I just touch base with her. Hey, thanks for the check. Great. I'll be sending some more stuff off soon.
Awesome.
And just touching base with her.
Yeah. So I kind of want to move forward since we're running so late. I feel like we've already covered like the struggles and what you can kind of look forward to in that. And the venues, there's also, I don't really know much about galleries or anything like that, but I think that that's something that, you need to do your research on stuff like that. I know that gallery pricing, when you price your art, needs to be a little bit higher, because people go into galleries prepared to pay gallery prices, because galleries charge more and they want a bigger cut. So you need to pump your prices up, but that's expected in those situations. And I think if you're going to do like private sales, is kind of a no-brainer. You're doing private sales, and you can research doing your own blog or website. And like you said, you can just do a blog and use Etsy as your storefront, which is kind of what I did. Or you can build your own website and have a store there. That's all stuff that you need to really research and know. I think the biggest thing is doing your research. Make sure that you know everything there is to know about that. But I wanted to jump forward and talk a little bit more about pricing, because that was one thing that most people that answered our survey said that they do struggle with pricing their artwork. And I found a pretty good article back when I started selling on Etsy. If you're on their mailing list, they send you little emails in their email list, and with cool blog posts that they do. And I'll post a link to this article about the formula that you use to figure out pricing. But you know a little bit more about that, and you said you had some good book recommendations for that.
Yeah, I wanted to mention 2 books. One is Handmade Marketplace. You can find it on Amazon. And the other one is Crafty Superstar. I'd say Crafty Superstar may be a little bit outdated, but I think that there's enough information that you can get out of that. If you skim through it, it has some actually good recommendations of venues to try, different big craft fairs to try, pricing, the formula for pricing your items, selling wholesale and retail. And it just touches a little bit on each thing. I think it scratches the surface enough to kind of get you going if you're just like, I don't even know where to start. I think it's a good one. And there's a lot of other ones. There's one even called Grow Your Homemade Business. I think all of them, they're pretty similar. You could pick one of those books from Amazon and get some good information from them if you're just at a loss of where to start.
Yeah, and I think the struggle that I have is just, it's hard to put a value on your work. I mean, this article says you need to pay yourself an hourly wage, and the more skilled you are and the longer that you've been doing it, you need to pay yourself an hourly wage. Like, you need to give yourself a raise.
Well, yeah, you need to value yourself.
And absolutely. I think people have a hard time doing that. Like, really, when you think about it, when I figured out what I was charging for my work, when I figured out the time and the hours I spent on it, and the materials, like, 'cause you need to factor in your materials and expenses also, you need to factor in like your business cards and transportation and stuff, like anything that your shipping fees, anything like that is coming off the top of what you're making. And when it came down to it, I realized I was paying myself less than minimum wage for doing the art that I was doing, and that sucked.
Right.
So, and I think just it can be kind of hard because also in my situation, I wasn't making a lot of sales.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like I should be charging less. Yeah, you know, I mean, I just felt like I wasn't, it's a weird limbo to be in, to have to put a price tag on your time and especially because I think for so many people, like, I think less so when I'm creating my journals and products like that are kind of more, you know, they're more retail pieces, as opposed to like when I'm doing actual pieces of artwork. Not to say that my journals aren't artwork, but when I'm doing like a big piece that I want to sell, I feel like it's really painful for me sometimes to have to try to put a price tag on that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm so emotionally invested in what it is and what it's become. So that's something that you really need to sit with. And I think the formula and the formulas in those books really help kind of direct you.
I think so. I think so too, because it really makes you realize like, oh wow, I need to really value myself, and wow, I need to be, you know, I'm way off. Or sometimes it's like, oh, okay, I'm in the right range, you know.
Yeah, no, I know. And I was actually shocked when I realized that I wasn't paying myself even minimum wage. I was like, oh shit. So I think we should probably wrap it up a bit because we are running real over on time. I feel like we covered it really well, but also, since we're going to be doing a summer series on this, and we're going to be doing one a month, please, audience, feel free to email us with any questions that you feel like we didn't answer. If we didn't answer something for you in this episode, or you feel like there's something that we should be covering that we're not, send us an email, because this is going to be an ongoing thing. And again, like I said, I'm probably going to add another episode to the series. So if we're forgetting something, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So, and speaking of email, Sharon, we finally got a fucking email.
Woo!
I know, I'm so excited. And this is what happens when you get email, when you send us email. We read it online. We read it on the show. We read it online. We read it on the show. Because Karen Isaacson, who is awesome, by the way, sent us an email and said, I can't believe it. I couldn't believe it when you, at the end of the episode 8, you said you hadn't gotten any email. Really? Maybe it's because I write all my emails in my head and never send them. So listening to you two makes me want to pour a big glass of wine and put my feet up on the table and join the conversation. But I always listen in my car, so that's probably not a good idea. The wine and the feet part. I have no trouble joining the conversation in the car. Those paintings, I don't remember what episode it was in. I think the first or second one. I think it was the one we were talking about mixed media. She said those paintings of the creepy big-eyed girls that you were talking about in one of the first episodes. Keane. Spelled Keane. Didn't you hear me shouting it while I drove? Walter Keane and his wife Margaret Keane. And thanks to a very informative Wikipedia page, I learned about the great scandal of Walter taking credit for Margaret's work. Who knew? I almost got nightmares looking at the pictures on Google. My pediatrician's office in the 70s had them all over the walls. Shudder. So, and she said she gets our theme song stuck in her head all the time. So, and she wrote an iTunes review, which was awesome also. And she blogged about us. And I was going to say, I'm going to put a link to her blog. She did a really nice article about our podcast and gave us awesome compliments. So
that's awesome.
I'm going to put a link to that in there and you can check out her blog. And she's, like I said, she's super awesome and cool. So thank you, Karen, so much for the email. It makes us really excited when we know that people are actually listening to us. And
that's
liking
awesome.
us. So, and we did have also, if I can find it, I should have pulled that up before we got started. We have a question from our Facebook page. So we have a question from the Two Artsy Gals Facebook page from listener Lonnie. And it went away just now because Facebook did something really dumb. Okay, here it is back again. Anyway, Lonnie said, in regards to our episode last week about mail art, she said that was fun and that she loves mail art. And she used to use old calendar pages to make cool and pretty envelopes. And that we gave her tons of ideas. But she has a question. She wanted to know how we determine the postage when mailing a faux severed foot. She must know. So, Lonnie, it's all done by weight. And the cool thing about faux severed feet is they're hollow. So they're actually really cheap to mail. And I have a postage scale that I use at home. and I pay for if I'm going to send stuff priority, I pay for it online. So I just weigh it. Or you just go into the post office and weigh it. But it's all done by weight. The shape of it does not determine, like, they don't charge you more because you're mailing something weird. There is not a tax on weirdness. Thank freaking God. Because I'd never be able to afford to mail anything. So, it's just weight.
Yeah.
That's all it is. So
there you go. So mail those severed limbs.
Dude, totally mail severed limbs. And they're awesome. And people freak out when they get them in the mail. So, it's pretty cool. I would love to get a severed limb in the mail. Not a real one. A faux severed limb.
A faux severed limb. Yeah, could mail you some chicken feet.
I would love it if you mailed me chicken feet. I'd set them by my crow feet.
Awesome.
Because you know I have crow feet, right?
I do know you have crow feet.
Actually, I have a taxidermy crow in my garage, too.
A whole one?
Yeah. So I was given to me, but I think it might have some bugs. So I'm going to take it to a place and have it looked at before I bring it inside. Because I don't want it to get grody. But anyway, that is a story for another day. So again, if anyone wants to email questions about today's episode or suggestions about future episodes, you can send those to 2artsygals@gmail.com. And as always, we will have links and pictures and show notes up from this episode the day that this episode comes out, and you can check that out on our blog at 2artsygals.wordpress.com. And you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, both free apps depending on what device you use to listen. So go do that, and you can leave us awesome feedback. That would be excellent, because then it bumps us up in the ratings. I think we're going to wrap it up for tonight. So until next time, see you later.
Bye.